Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 116 of the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. I'm sure you all have been busy dealing with the public charge rule, but as of a few hours ago, there was at least a temporary injunction on that, so we'll see what happens with that. But today I'm going to introduce a great attorney who's in the UK and is doing some great work over there, and a lot of interesting business information that I think is worth listening to. I just want to note that because it was like a long distance recording here, for whatever technical reason, parts of it don't sound the best, but please try to listen to the whole thing. You definitely are going to learn at least one thing that's going to help your firm take the business and marketing stuff to the next level, as well as getting to know a great UK attorney. And it's good to have that network of attorneys from all over the world, because inevitably you're going to have a client that has a UK issue, and they need someone there who they can rely on and has got a good system and is just a good guy. And I think Amir Zaidi is the guy. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Immigration Lawyers Podcast, and we'll get it started now. Welcome to the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. I am the host, Attorney John Khosravi, and I practice U.S. immigration law exclusively. For more information about the program, please visit www.immigrationlawyerspodcast.com. Please note that this recording is informational only and does not constitute legal advice. Please consult with a licensed attorney for specific legal guidance that suits your case. Also, this recording is copyrighted and written permission is required for rebroadcasting. For more information about me, please visit www.jqqlaw.com. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. I'm with Amir Zaidi. Amir is a really interesting attorney to talk to right now because he's a British attorney in England and London, I believe. Is that correct?
Right in the heart of London, yes, John.
Right in the heart of London. So he does immigration there, and they're going through their own version of immigration uncertainty and hell that we're going to in the U.S. with variables changing every day. So I wanted to get him on board and talk about how he did it. Also, he launched his own firm, started successful, a lot of employees, about that process and everything else that we talk about all the time. So Amir, thanks so much for coming on the show.
You're very welcome, John. It's good to be here.
Thanks so much. So why don't you tell us about yourself, how you got involved in law and eventually in immigration law?
Well, I started practicing immigration law as a barrister approximately 10 years ago and enjoyed the practice. I enjoyed going to court. I enjoyed representing clients. But I soon discovered that as a barrister, I rely on my solicitor, my practicing main lawyer, to prepare the documents for me. And unfortunately, as is often the case in both the US and in the UK, there are a lot of immigration lawyers, a lot of immigration attorneys who don't do a good job. The market is broken. I realized I could do a better job by providing service from the beginning of client case right to the point of trial. And so set up my own firm. That was 10 years ago. So this is my 20th year overall in legal business. I started with myself in an office. I knew I wanted to get big quite quickly. We're currently just about 30, although it soon be 31 staff. And things are interesting in the immigration market in the UK at the moment.
So thank you for sharing that. I cut in and out, so I want to highlight some certain things you said. But so you were a barrister, and then you would need the help of solicitors. Is it permitted to be both those in England, or you have to separate and choose one?
Things are rapidly changing, but when I was choosing what part of the career I would follow, when I left college, it was one or the other. You must be a barrister or you must be a solicitor, and both sides of the profession look at each other over the divide and don't quite trust each other that much.
And so now, does your firm do full services, do both ends of it?
Yeah, so since then there have been, I'll start again. So since then there have been changes, and now the firm does everything from initial applications or initial advice to the point of reviewing refusals and going to court for appeals.
What do they call it there when they're going to kick someone out? Is that removal or deportation as well, or do they use other terminology?
They use that terminology, yeah. So removal is where you would be leaving without you having committed a criminal offence. So your visa is expired, you may have been rounded up. Where you've specifically committed a criminal offence, you've been arrested, you've been imprisoned for a period of time, then the process of removing you after that is called deportation, and that's a more serious form of removal.
Interesting. So, what was it that caused this change where they allowed the barristers and solicitors to be one? What was the impetus of that change?
Well, ironically, it was because it was deemed not to be providing a good service because, of course, you would have to pay twice. You would have somebody to prepare your application. And fair enough, you would normally pay more if there was an appeal, but you wouldn't have to pay a huge amount to another law firm to do their due diligence, to sign you up, to re-examine the facts and to go again. So they're allowing those things to happen. In immigration, they're breaking down the rules a little bit more as well, because they understand that often the clients are particularly vulnerable, and so this divide doesn't necessarily service them well.
So, are they like in the U.S.? There's talk in Chicago or Illinois and California about allowing non-lawyers to practice in this area. Is there a lot of that in England? Both people doing it illegally, just non-lawyers helping the community, or are they trying to break down the wall so everyone could help, kind of thing?
Yeah, so since 1999, there was a legal change which allowed non-lawyers to undertake um, immigration work. And actually, the rules that were put in place for those immigration advisors, we call them, are actually pretty stringent. They require you to take specific examinations in immigration rules, the immigration law, and it also requires you only to undertake work level, then you have to renew them. Compare that in the UK to the traditional immigration attorney. He might be doing a family case. He may never have taken an immigration exam in his life, but he can undertake immigration work. These new, since 1999, immigration advisors at least have been required to undertake exams and can be removed from the lists if they don't if they receive a complaint about immigration or they don't show that their audits are up to scratch.
So, Brexit's coming, and that's a big unknown of how law practice is going to be. But how is it in England? Is it like the U.S. where, like, even before this, everything would change or the laws were not clear? It's more agency decisions internally, and it's more experience than actual laws. Is that the same way over there?
Absolutely, yeah. It's similar, I think, to the US in that what we call the border agency, which is similar to the INS, can specifically change the rules without what you would describe as a full motion of Congress. So our Parliament doesn't have to sit when there's a big immigration rule change. So what that means is often you would have a situation where you know a change is coming. You may not know exactly what it is. And there is a season for changes, April and October. And so often you're working with clients saying, well, let's apply early because there is a rule change coming, or there may even be not even a specific rule change, but a fee change, an application fee change, and you'd rather work before those changes kick in. The other interesting thing is that often these changes can be unilateral. So they can announce, let's say on a Monday, that there will be a rule change, and that rule change will come in on Tuesday, come in on the next day, specifically because they know that if the rule change is making a specific category harder, they don't want a rush of applications to get in before the rule change.
Wow, that's pretty harsh.
It's very harsh. Now, I suppose because this happens a lot, migrant communities, the only advantage of the rhetoric that is going on in the US and perhaps going on in the UK as well, where government departments, government officials are speaking very harshly about immigration, is that as an immigration lawyer, the clients understand that the system may well be acting irrationally or acting very toughly. And I think before they would expect justice and fairness, and now they don't. And so if I'm sure this is the same for you, we simply say, well, it's the Brexit effect. And I'm sure you would say something similar with the Trump effect. And the client would accept, okay, that sounds like what you're saying is not insane, even though the rule change is insane.
Yeah, it in that sense it helped because a lot of this insanity is existing for a while, but people for us was like, oh, Obama loves immigrants. I'm like, no. It's just the government agencies. There's not much love. But so like we have this public charge changes coming on the 15th of this month, 2 weeks from this recording. And it's just like I have a new clients coming in for cases that get affected by it. I don't even know how to judge the pricing of it or how to
give guidance. Either we have to do it really quick, which clients is hard to do. They need so much documents that they rarely could get things done quickly. So it just creates a difficult situation where I'm like, maybe I shouldn't do consultations for the next 2-3 weeks because I can't give good advice. But how are you dealing with advising clients on Brexit when it's such an unknown? How does your firm deal with that?
Well, pricing, I think you're right, is a big issue. And actually, we've shifted approach. When we were a firm of one or two lawyers, we couldn't afford, when we offered fixed fees, to have to do a considerable amount of extra work without charging more. So at that time, we would give our clients the choice. Well, you can have a fixed fee, but if something happens, then we will charge an amount to be decided when we know what the change is. Since then, one advantage of having a larger firm is that you can manage the amount of uncertainty in that if a rule change we think is coming in, we will say to a client, well, we can on a couple of occasions, we can let things go from a referral source which is trusted by us. We would rather take a small hit for 1 or 2 cases across the whole firm rather than lose the referral. It's a big challenge. I speak to colleagues, law school friends and alumni, and they're not doing immigration and they won't work on fixed fees. They work on an hourly rate. And I think it's the nature of immigration that the clients almost certainly will not want to tolerate any risk in terms of the fees and will want a fixed price at the beginning. So often, sometimes you have to take it on the chin.
The fixed fee situation, it's easier for me because I've never done hourly because I was an immigration attorney and it's such a hassle to keep track. I keep a general track of myself to keep an idea of how things go. But I understand if I was, an immigrant and not familiar with the legal system, the hourly system seems super scary. I'm guessing, maybe if you're from Commonwealth countries, if you're like an Indian national coming or, Australia, maybe you've dealt with hourly. But for a lot of countries, the idea of doing hourly is it's insane because it's like an unknown cost that's going to explode on you. So I understand the toughness of that.
It is tough. And I think the other thing to recall is not just the culture of that the clients may come from. It may well be that they've never really used a lawyer before, maybe for a home purchase, which is often fixed price, but often they see you as a service, which as a consumer they would take. They don't necessarily fully understand what it is to hire a lawyer and the lawyer takes in terms of time. And often we'll find that apart from corporate clients who are very used to hiring a lawyer and understand what we do, but often individual clients will not know how to engage a lawyer, will not quite understand how things work. And fixed fee, I suppose that was reassuring.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. Taking a step back, even when a person calls me, as you said, it's the first time they're ever talking to a lawyer. So I always have to remember, don't just look at it as just one of your 1,000 cases. It's like this person is feeling very vulnerable, and you have to kind of onboard them cautiously because they're afraid of lawyers. They've heard all this bad stuff, and they know that it's going to be expensive. You got to really hold their hand and not rush them and let them be who they are. And calmly bring him to the process. So, how did you get your firm from? We've talked before from just yourself making the decision to start a firm to 31% firm.
Well, I suppose the first thing is to be very humble to acknowledge the fact that if you simply do immigration work competently, then often you rise very quickly in a place like London because there are so few competent providers of that service. But frankly, I think I started my firm over time. I started in 2009. And at that time in the UK, yes, everybody knew what Google was and everybody knew how to use Google. And most knew that there were Google ads too. But when not many law firms were using Google ads and another type of ads, LinkedIn ads, etc. So I used those fairly quickly. Understood that they would work well for me. I suppose the biggest difference is not only the use of Google, which frankly anyone can do with this time, but then to specifically create a process which into account the fact that these clients are calling us cold. So often I won't have an attorney answer the phone call. I have a specific team of attorneys, but who don't have specific casework obligations, and these attorneys are just there to answer the phone, to give shallow advice, quick advice, but also to establish whether the person may have a case. And that seems to work well for us. That's created a scalable model.
The quality of it was good. I want to repeat what you said. So you have these cold calls that come in, which is the same with me. And instead of you have attorneys set up to take those cold calls, so they could give him a warm welcome, give advice needed, and if it's going to be a case, to be able to continue it.
Exactly right. So I think in the business parlance, you would call them a market response team. So all your marketing, your inbound marketing, wherever that might be, that's designed to get them to telephone. They can email and contact us through an inquiry form. But in reality, we want to get to a telephone call quickly. Yeah. So then we have attorneys who, frankly, are tired of paperwork, who may want a short break from paperwork, or attorneys who never enjoy doing the paperwork in immigration anyway. But they have good knowledge, and they have an understanding of strategy and how to look after clients. And their role is to answer the initial call, set up the initial call, and make a decision on a broad strategy of what should happen, also to qualify a client, and also to reassure the client to the point where he feels comfortable with our firm as opposed to the other firm. Now, the difficulty there, of course, is how do you find lawyers who don't want a lawyer, who are happy to take these calls. But once you find them, then you create a stable system that for every 6 or 7 attorneys, you have one who simply answers the phone and tees up work for those attorneys. The challenge there, which I think most lawyers would recognize, is of course the person who the client is speaking to on the telephone is different to the person who they later put their trust in. And that's important that handover is done properly. So it's important to have a good CRM system which gives good, accurate notes. It's important that the person handling the call is very clear that he won't be the person in charge of the case, and if they want to do it, you will have a specific who will do the case. And of course, the handover is important when the client comes to the office, which they usually do. And they want to speak to a lawyer, they'll do so for an hour. But the person who handled the call will often be in that meeting, maybe for the first 20 minutes, just to ensure that he can act as the client's champion. So it's very difficult to do. It took me a long time to understand how to tweak that system and to get it to work well. And it still occasionally falls down when a client has specific requirements. But generally speaking, it's scalable. And those that want a scalable system in immigration, I think that works very well.
So the system design is genius. I mean, you have to have a certain scale and way of doing it to be able to handle having lawyers handling phone calls. But I found it's the most important thing. There's lawyers here that a lot of lawyers, it's standard now to have these call services. They answer the phone calls with just random people that speak English or Spanish or something. But one is when I've called my friends' offices and I get those recordings, I don't usually like the way they answer the phone. And they're just there to write the name and contact information for a lawyer to follow up. But the best way I've realized to close and get a case is to have a lawyer pick up, talk with them, see what's going on with the case right there, and then move it along, rather than just pause it and wait for an attorney to call them back. And it ruins the flow of the situation. You have to have, go ahead.
100% agree. I mean, the speed of response is hugely important. I used to think when we were a much smaller firm that actually the clients would almost feel that the firm wasn't a proper law firm if there was a lawyer who you could get on the phone straight away. You'd almost sort of present yourself as, oh, we're very busy, that means we're very good. But of course, a client doesn't care about that. They're very stressed, they're very vulnerable. Even if they're not, there's a trigger point when they've decided to do something about their case. And that trigger point is the phone call. And if you can speak to them quickly, accurately, if you can solve whatever's on their mind, they will remember that, and almost certainly they will be happy to move along the flow of the next step, the meeting. I 100% agree. The other problem I found, we use those call services. You mean, John, the sort of the remote locations that can pick up the phone for you?
Yeah.
Yeah. We use those for a while, and we still do when the office is closed. The problem, of course, is that the service might be good, but it's only as good as the individual who's picking up the phone. And there may be someone very, very good, and there may be somebody who's just, not on it that day, and you can never service that. And it's always the hidden information. You never know when a client is slightly unhappy or slightly has gone away because he wasn't spoken to properly by these remote services. So where possible, we try and have a lawyer pick up.
This format that you set up where you have attorneys, when possible, answer the phone and talk with them, is this commonplace, or is this something that you learned from or you created on your own?
Well, I created on my own in the sense that I thought it would work well. I initially created it because I was feeling a bit burnt out with the paperwork, so I decided to answer the phone a lot, and then it seemed like, well, that would work well. Since then, I do know there are other firms that have this system. Some of them are not only in immigration, in fact, in personal injury cases, in cases where there's been car accidents. Often it's about who signs the client up quickest. So they'll often have a market response team too. Essentially, if you can divide the firms up into those that advertise heavily. The firms that advertise heavily in the UK will almost certainly have a market response team, and those who perhaps rely on word of mouth only without advertising, they may often not have a market response team because, of course, a client will wait if he's been referred to a lawyer who's very good. They'll wait a day or so, or even a few hours for a phone call because they want that individual lawyer who's been referred to them.
Now, I've only heard rumors about this, but UK is supposed to have very strict marketing advertising laws for lawyers. Was that just an old law where I think they would say lawyers can't even have the name of their firm outside the building? They kind of be hidden or something like that. How much is that still the case?
Well, that is the case, and that's specifically related to the barristers side of the field. So what you would perhaps call a trial attorney. So I did that job for just over 10 years, and yes, the barristers' chambers, so that essentially the firm of chambers wouldn't have names. They would have names like 1 Mitre Court Buildings, which was their address, or the chambers of Lord Templeton QC, just simply a very simple name, nothing branded. That's changing. You get occasional chambers such as Matrix Chambers or Liberty Chambers or things like that. But in reality, there's not a lot of advertising. I'll tell you a funny story about being a barrister, John, if you have time. There are rules about commerciality. So as a barrister, I can't negotiate my fees. I have a clerk a barrister's clerk who answers the phone, checks that I'm free on that day, and then will negotiate the fee with the lawyer who's engaging them. So essentially, the story is that barristers don't do it for the money. They do it to help clients. They're old-fashioned gentlemen who help people, and so you'll have seen on various dramas. Downton Abbey type dramas that often in UK trials the barristers are wearing a wig, and I used to have a wig, and a long gown. And the funny story is, in the long gown there is a pocket at the back of the gown, supposedly because the client would place your fee in the back of the pocket without you seeing it, because you would be totally insulted to take money. So I went from that scenario, that paradigm where you don't take money at all, to having to figure out how much to charge clients and developing the system.
That's fascinating. Yeah, the history is so interesting. I once heard the word Esquire comes from an old British noble title, where it's like those the go-between between the aristocracy and the regular people. Do you have any information on where the word Esquire comes from, or is it just one of those words that?
Yeah, Esquire comes from the word squire, which any reader of fantasy novels will know is the person who assists the knight. The knight is the person who often owns the land. A landed knight, a sire or a sir, And yes, a squire would be someone who is a gentleman but doesn't own land, or isn't a traditional landlord. So yes, that's where the word esquire comes from. But nowadays it doesn't quite apply. So apologies for the background noise. No, now it doesn't quite apply because, of course, most people, including lawyers, are homeowners. But yeah, that I think, if I'm right, is where esquire comes from.
Oh, definitely interesting. So, what are the plans? So you have firm, I mean, you got a big machine that you're operating, so it must take a lot of time. How does your schedule look like with a machine like that? Are you working nonstop, or do you have management teams enough where you could live a normal life and not be stuck in the office all day?
One of it's a good question, actually. One of the challenges I set myself was to be able to get home at a normal time, and immigration isn't an area of law that lends itself to that. You often end up booking hours. Now that I'm not running a caseload, I'm running the legal team. Yes, on occasion there'll be lots of work to do, but I can schedule it how I want. So I do tend to get home in time to see the kids, and that's taken a lot of time. It's taken a number of years to get to that point. And I have to leave before my attorneys leave, because they're the ones who are actually servicing clients directly. I would always suggest, and I don't know if these are tips that would be useful to your listeners, who I understand are mostly immigration attorneys, but I think important thing always is to have the correct data coming into your firm. So we use Salesforce to log every single lead that comes in, and what that means is that it saves me time. If I need to, I can see a problem before it actually jumps up at me. So I can, for example, call up a report which says, actually, we're doing less marriage visas than we were. What's going on? Mm-hmm. And I can look at the marketing and see if it's fallen down. I find, and I find that the thing that makes you work late is where something's gone wrong. And by having this data, having things like Salesforce, having the staff be very disciplined about recording data on our system, you can then draw up reports, which gives you a lot of information.
That's discipline's an important thing, because I have such a problem with CRM because I don't have the discipline in inputting stuff or keeping track of it. Is that something one of those things you constantly have to tell staff and be on top of it to make sure data goes in properly?
Yeah, so we that is the hugest challenge, and a great lawyer is not a great data inputter. So when you tell me that you don't like CRMs, I think, well, I'll hire you for a case, because you'll be a great attorney. No, it is a challenge. We have training in the office. In fact, we break every Wednesday for at lunchtime for 2 hours of internal training. And that's half of that is legal training, because as we've discussed, immigration changes practically daily. But the other half is how to use the systems and what they're there for and why we do what we do. And I find that if you can lean into an attorney's natural instincts and say, well, actually, providing a great service to your client will include making sure their file is in order by ticking all these boxes, that often helps. We've actually done another thing. We've tied our CRM to the system that produces reviews, that requests reviews. Mm-hmm. And one thing about attorneys is that quite rightly, they're very careful about their profiles. They want to be seen as a very good lawyer. And as you know, online reviews are very important. So where they're named in a review, they're rightly proud. They go back to their partner and show them the review. And so what we've done is we've said, well, look, the system will only generate a request for a review when all the boxes have been ticked at the correct time. And so that naturally gives an incentive other than money. Yeah, I mean, that came from, I think, a Harvard Business Review report, which said if you want to incentivize an attorney, make sure you incentivize them on their profile, on how good an attorney they look like, rather than simply money or management. listening to the boss, management sort of training, etc.
How often do you do reading, non-law reading? Are you an avid reader? Because you mentioned the Harvard Business Review, where you just find that one article, or are you avidly looking for information like this?
When I'm in the middle of a project, I'll be looking for something specific. But I try and I have a long commute, so I drive into London from a town about an hour away. So I'm in the car for about an hour a day. And the wealth of information that exists, podcasts like yours, podcast, but also an audiobook on business, or just on whatever the latest non-fiction sort of book is. I'll often listen to it, and you never will find a book that says this is how you run your immigration practice. But in most books, you'll find across a couple of hours, maybe 3 hours, one really good nugget of information. Yeah. And so an example of that would be what we're doing at the moment, which is looking to establish what our clients' sort of feedback is, their satisfaction. And so I was listening to an audiobook about Net Promoter Score. And we're thinking now about how we ask our clients for feedback, so we can compare the lawyers that we have to see who's getting the best feedback. And the information is really interesting, because clients' comments can often scare lawyers. But what we've discovered with immigration is really useful information, that a certain attorney who let's say he's somebody who's from an Indian background, he is doing very, very well, and has a fantastic net promoter score with Saudi clients, but has a very poor net promoter score with let's say Ghanaian clients. And so then we, with that data coming in, you can start to get them to correct problems that they may see, or language that they may use, and you can provide internal training, or you can frankly just keep attorney away from a certain nationality.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, that stuff is interesting, actually.
I every time there's a book that comes out, especially immigration law practice, there are ones that come out here in the U.S. Most of them are just so general, it's hard to do anything with it. But I'm in this coaching space for immigration lawyers, so I read all of them. And like, I just got the most recent book that came out, and the person did a lot of work. It's a big book, but I got like one nugget of information out of the whole thing. It was kind of debatable whether it was worth the time. But one thing that author put in there was add in your contract, if clients disappear, that they could drop them. So sometimes client signs up and you need documents, all of a sudden months go by and not there, and it's very frustrating because you got to remember what was going on when they do come back and that kind of stuff. Do you have something in your contract about clients disappearing and you be able to drop the case or something like that?
We do, actually. We have a caveat that says we expect your case to finish at this much time, and usually it's 2 to 3 months. But however, if we, and this is not in the processing phase for the border agency, for the immigration authorities, that could take forever. But in terms of our actual processing, yes, clients can often disappear. So we have a provision that says, well, if you do disappear, we can bill you for the time charged, because they'll often hold a deposit with us. And we reserve the right to charge you again for as I said, for fact management, for improving things. So we do have that provision. However, clients tend to be really happy when you don't do that. So it's in the contract, and so often we'll waive that, or we'll charge a third of our time when we could have done that. But it's a huge problem. We also do a lot of work for clients who are outside of the United Kingdom, so who are coming to the country, and they often don't have a deadline to make an application, so they can take a long time. Yeah. And so often we speak to them about that.
Interesting. There's so much business, so we got to set up a time, just do a call about business management and stuff like that. There's a lot to learn from your success and what you've done. There's a lot of questions I want to ask. A lot of it's going to be private business practice information, so I said to put all over the internet like this. But you've done a great job. And so what are the plans? Which direction are you going to take your firm at now?
Well, I don't want to make myself unpopular, but we've just, I think in the last 2 months, we've we've started to build out our non-immigration division.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've discovered, and probably I think many of your listeners will discover, is that actually in immigration, as a new firm, you can suddenly pick up clients that you wouldn't have picked up otherwise. You could often punch above your weight. So we've often found in London that we're picking up clients who are looking for a good immigration lawyer, and there are other lawyers, very well established lawyers. They're property lawyers, they're commercial contract lawyers, very well established lawyers. And so what we discovered is actually then because we're first lawyers on the scene, and we've sorted out their visas, there's a natural trust, and we're referring them out, we're signposting them out to other attorneys for when they buy their house, when they set up a business, when they get into trouble with contracts, etc. And so we decided, well, let's start to do that ourselves. And so there's going to be teething trouble there, but the future plan is to become not an immigration law firm, but a law firm for immigrants.
Are there any specific areas that overlap the most that you're starting with first?
Well, you will know from your experience that migrants tend to be naturally entrepreneurial. Mm-hmm. So we're starting off with essentially business advice and labor law advice for small businesses, which are invariably these new migrants set up in the country.
Yeah, my wife's an attorney. And so she works for a company, but on the side, because I get the business stuff that comes up, I have her do trademark and some sort of intellectual property stuff that's simple enough they do. But you need a kind of a whole system to be able to do this stuff properly. So if a client wants it and they're really pushing it, they want to stay within the firm and family, I say, okay, my spouse could handle the basic trademark stuff and copyright stuff. But it's fascinating.
Yeah, whenever I refer a client out to somebody, they'll ask who they are, and often they're not family members. But then if I often say, well, my cousin's a CPA, oh, your cousin, okay, and they're really excited to work with a family member. I think from the cultures they come from, if you're a family member of somebody you trust, then you're equally trustworthy too. And they almost feel it's an honor to be referred to a family member if I refer them to one of my family members. So that's always fun to see that.
Wonderful. Amir, I'm going to start wrapping up, but do you have any specific things you want to add, or what is the best way people to learn about you, contact you, especially when they have outbound stuff for the UK?
Yeah, we're at westkinassociates.com, www.westkinassociates.com. My details are on the website too. We will invariably pop up if you type in immigration law London because of our SEO and PPC presence. And we use LinkedIn and Facebook. We post pretty much daily too.
I'll have your information in the show notes. But thank you so much for coming on the show. It was fascinating. And I think we touched on the tip of the iceberg, especially the business management stuff. I know people are excited to learn more about Brexit, but I think the problem is no one knows what's going on in Brexit to be able to really dig into it too much.
It used to be the case that when I used to give advice to clients, I'd say, well, here's my knowledge of what's happening with Brexit, but it might change in a couple of weeks. But I think now we're saying, well, here's my advice on Brexit. It may change in a couple of hours. So we'll know more at the end of October.
I mean, I kind of asked this before, but how are you dealing with existing clients on this? And are people just kind of quitting their jobs if they're on a work visa and say, you know what, I'm going back to Poland, for example, I'm not going to deal with this. How is the psychology of the immigrant right now with this unknown aspect? Yeah,
so they feel very disappointed. I mean, they feel very unloved and unwanted. However, you have to understand that yes, whilst Brexit was voted for, it was voted for by a very small margin. And if it happened again, I'm fairly neutral on this, but if the vote happened again, I think most people believe that Brexit would be voted down. So in the places where migrants congregate, the big cities and certain suburbs, those areas, the British voters is overwhelmingly pro-migrant. Mm-hmm. It's in the places where there are very few migrants, where they don't have experience of the energy that migrants bring and the value that they bring in healthcare and taxi driving and all the other things and restaurant building that they do. those places voted against, voted for Brexit, which is essentially an anti-migrant vote. I think that it's probably a similar scenario in the US. Once you're exposed to a migrant, you don't mind them too much. So they do feel disappointed, but then their natural life, the people they spend their time around, are sympathetic to them. So no, they're not just quitting. I think the freezing effect will be for new people. New people will be, and this has already been shown in the figures. People are not coming to the UK. They would rather stay in Germany or France, or if they're German, go to France rather than come to the UK. And that's only going to be a shame for the UK, I think.
How much was Brexit about immigration? How much was it about not letting Brussels make decisions? Was immigration a big talking point in the marketing of Brexit?
Yeah, I mean, the pro-Brexit campaign specifically ran on. It started off with a pro-healthcare model. They said our national healthcare system will be better funded if we move out of Europe. When that was debunked, then they moved to the usual anti-migrant sentiment, and they combined that with an anti-Muslim sentiment too. So one of their biggest sort of successful campaigns, which again was factually debunked, was to say, well, we don't want to stay in Europe. Turkey will become a member of the European Union, and therefore, I think 19 million Turks could come within the UK, which would make our food a lot better. But it wasn't what it scared people, which quite rightly it scared people. So I think most people would say that it went hand in hand. If you were pro Brexit, you were probably anti-immigrant at the same.
Interesting. Amir, thank you so much. I'll definitely be in touch, and hopefully you'll have a podcast running soon as well, and I'll be listening to that.
My podcast itch is being scratched by your podcast, actually. So maybe, but I'd love to come back soon whenever you want. Yeah,
I mean, if you don't make your podcast, your business experience, and I'm really into marketing and business, is worth having just regular sessions every other month or something. Just talk about your thoughts on the process, what's going on. Who knows? You might make an ad agency on the side to help lawyers do their marketing.
No, that sounds like an idea. But don't tell my wife; she wants me home earlier.
Now, I'm reading a book by a Brit named Rory Sutherland. Have you heard of Rory Sutherland? He does marketing for a company called Ogilvy, vice president of.
I know Ogilvy very, very well. I don't know the book, but I'm going to look it up. But yeah, Ogilvy are very, very they're known as intellectual advertisers. They really think about what they're trying to do and what message they're trying to send. So I'm sure that book's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, the vice president wrote a book. I've been watching his TED Talks and his interviews and stuff. And it's very interesting stuff that he says, just thinking differently. Because people think so much about being rational, but it's like his idea is like everything that could have been solved with being rational has been solved already. Now you got to think about solving the human psychological component. For example, if there's and he's a UK, so he has UK examples. If you're going to extend the metro or the tube or something like that, it's going to cost 10 billion. What is London's money? London pounds. Yeah. It's like, well, you could spend £1 billion and then give free Wi-Fi and free drinks to people. And even though the time it takes is not going to get less, they're going to enjoy the time. So it doesn't even make a difference. Yeah. At the Wi-Fi, they'll be working, so it doesn't even matter if it's longer. So it's like thinking differently about stuff. That's something I really get a kick out of doing, being creative like that. And I see you're doing as well.
Yeah, I mean, finding the emotion or the pain or the fear of a client not only is great business because then they'll sign up with you, but it's actually really important for the service. Mm-hmm. It's really important for the service. If you help solve that pain, the client will feel so grateful to you.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Amir, thank you so much. We'll be in touch. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, John. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.